all of these money moves good moves for baseball, Russ?
I think that is a complicated question from the sense of I think it's very layered. At face value, though, is spending money good for baseball? Absolutely 100% yes. When you look at the revenues that are moving in baseball, baseball made close to $11 billion last season, numbers that the league hadn't seen since prior to COVID. It would make sense that players are making money in free agency, and it also makes sense that the guy who happens to be the richest owner in all of baseball is spending money on the franchise that he owns to try to win.
Okay, but you want to jump in on that real quick?
No, I mean, it is good for baseball. And I mean, I would say, and he is trying to win. And there's not many owners that, well, he's the richest owner in all of baseball, like you said, Russ, but they don't have the same amount of money as him. But they also don't have the passion, I think, that Steve Cohen has. And I think a lot of times, you know, there are teams across the league. There's 14 teams right now across the league that have a payroll under $100 million. You mean to tell me, those teams, they have the money to pay their players. They're just choosing not to, and that's the disconnect, and that's what bothers me with baseball sometimes.
So, but this goes back to this idea, and I started thinking about this earlier when we were tossing this conversation around, is if you mentioned that some of these owners are just not competitive, and I would totally agree with that by the way that they're spending. You can look at the numbers and you can tell that. I look at the sport that I love the most in football. There is a salary cap, and I would say that most of the owners have a competitive spirit. They want to win games. They want to spend to be able to go out there and win championships. Now, some of these people have no idea what they're doing, and that's why they can't put together an organization that can actually compete, but they're putting dollars behind it. All of this to say that when you have a guy like Cohen who's going to go out there and just spend, if you're one of those teams who does not have the pockets like him, even though you do have money, you feel like you can't compete. Does this sport need a salary cap, a hard salary cap?
No, because those same teams weren't going to spend on those players anyway.
Right, but if you feel like you can never get them, you're not going to go out there and try to spend to begin with.
How can you compete with one of the richest owners in all of baseball? If you're an owner, you love baseball, you love this team, you want to go out there and spend that kind of money, $1.6 billion.
If you're not showing your fan bases that you say, hey, we're trying to compete, we're trying to compete, we're trying to compete, it's a word that is void for a lot of fans out there because they look at you and say, how are you competing? We're paying this much for season tickets. We're paying this much to park. We're paying this much for all this infrastructure around the ballpark that cities are paying for, that taxpayers are paying for, and we're not seeing that product on the field.
It goes back to this idea that if I'm at an auction and I'm trying to bid on an item, but I see Bill Gates in there trying to bid on the same thing, I'm probably not even going to try to jump in because I know I cannot.
I just know I can't. Small market San Diego reportedly offer Aaron Judge $400 million. San Diego is not New York in terms of market size, but their ownership group ponied up and said, this is what it's going to cost to get this guy in here. The guy didn't take their money, but the fact that they were willing to offer it as a small market team, you can no longer have this argument of big market versus small market. It's the haves and the have-nots and the wills and the won'ts.
No, I'm not arguing that they shouldn't attempt to, but what I'm saying is that there comes a certain point where you feel like you have such a disadvantage that there is no reason for you to even try anymore. And I understand that perspective. And what I am advocating for is the fact that if you had a hard salary cap in there, it would level the playing field from the fact that you know that he can only go out there and make so many moves. It would level out the ability for other teams to get in on some of these, because you'd be maxed out. You'd be tapped out on the amount of guys that you can just spend and spend and spend on. So then everybody could at least get in on some of these battles and feel like they have a legitimate chance. Because once you're out of the cap, you can't go over. You can't do it. Hard cap it.
If you're players out here and you've earned the right to get yourself to free agency, and you have ownership groups that it feels like are suppressing that because we don't have the money to compete with the Mets or Steve Cohen, so we just won't offer guys like that. Now my market as a free agent has diminished. And because of that, I will naturally, like in business, I will make less money because there are less people out here willing to pay me that dollar. My leverage goes away. And do I think what Steve Cohen is doing is bad for baseball? No. No, I do not. Do I think there are things baseball needs to do to ensure that other owners around the game spend? I'm not saying you have to go out there and have a payroll of $385 million. I'm not saying that at all. But having a team that has a payroll of $385 million and having a team that has a payroll of $40 million, there's a huge disconnect there.